Ela dirige para o trabalho todos os dias.
She drives to work every day. She drives to work every day.
Preciso levar meus filhos para a escola esta manhã.
I need to drive my kids to school this morning. I need to drive my kids to school this morning.
Ele dirige um carro esportivo que comprou recentemente.
He drives a sports car that he recently bought. He drives a sports car that he recently bought.
Vamos dirigir até a praia neste fim de semana para um passeio em família.
We will drive to the beach this weekend for a family outing. We will drive to the beach this weekend for a family outing.
Não posso dirigir à noite porque tenho problemas de visão.
I can't drive at night because I have poor eyesight. I can't drive at night because I have poor eyesight.
Ele dirigiu até o mercado para comprar alguns ingredientes.
He drove to the grocery store to pick up some ingredients. He drove to the grocery store to pick up some ingredients.
Eles decidiram dirigir até as montanhas para as férias.
They decided to drive to the mountains for their holiday. They decided to drive to the mountains for their holiday.
Vou levar meus pais ao aeroporto amanhã.
I'm going to drive my parents to the airport tomorrow. I'm going to drive my parents to the airport tomorrow.
Ela dirige com cuidado em más condições climáticas.
She drives carefully in bad weather conditions. She drives carefully in bad weather conditions.
Ele está aprendendo a dirigir para poder tirar a carteira no mês que vem.
He's learning to drive so he can get his license next month. He's learning to drive so he can get his license next month.
Dirigi de Nova York até a Califórnia.
I drove all the way from New York to California. I drove all the way from New York to California.
Deveríamos dirigir até o show para evitar o incômodo do transporte público.
We should drive to the concert to avoid the hassle of public transport. We should drive to the concert to avoid the hassle of public transport.
Ele dirige rápido, mas sabe controlar o carro.
He drives fast, but he knows how to control the car. He drives fast, but he knows how to control the car.
Ela me levou ao consultório médico esta manhã.
She drove me to the doctor's office this morning. She drove me to the doctor's office this morning.
Eles decidiram dirigir em vez de voar para economizar dinheiro.
They decided to drive instead of fly to save money. They decided to drive instead of fly to save money.
Dirijo até o parque todo fim de semana para passear com meu cachorro.
I drive to the park every weekend to walk my dog. I drive to the park every weekend to walk my dog.
Ele me levou para casa depois da festa ontem à noite.
He drove me home after the party last night. He drove me home after the party last night.
Não me sinto confortável dirigindo na neve.
I'm not comfortable driving in the snow. I'm not comfortable driving in the snow.
Ela dirige um carro híbrido para reduzir sua pegada de carbono.
She drives a hybrid car to reduce her carbon footprint. She drives a hybrid car to reduce her carbon footprint.
Ele está dirigindo há 5 horas e está cansado.
He's been driving for 5 hours and is feeling tired. He's been driving for 5 hours and is feeling tired.
Eu dirijo um carro com transmissão manual, o que requer mais foco.
I drive a manual transmission car, which requires more focus. I drive a manual transmission car, which requires more focus.
Estamos planejando dirigir pelo interior para ver as cores do outono.
We're planning to drive through the countryside to see the fall colors. We're planning to drive through the countryside to see the fall colors.
Ela adora dirigir com as janelas abertas e a música tocando.
She loves to drive with the windows down and the music playing. She loves to drive with the windows down and the music playing.
Ele dirigiu a noite toda para chegar à reunião na hora.
He drove through the night to make it to the meeting on time. He drove through the night to make it to the meeting on time.
Eu dirijo para o trabalho porque é mais conveniente do que pegar o ônibus.
I drive to work because it's more convenient than taking the bus. I drive to work because it's more convenient than taking the bus.
Ele dirige com as duas mãos no volante por segurança.
He drives with both hands on the wheel for safety. He drives with both hands on the wheel for safety.
Nós dirigimos até a cidade mais próxima para visitar o museu.
We drove to the nearest town to visit the museum. We drove to the nearest town to visit the museum.
Eu dirijo há mais de 10 anos sem nenhum acidente.
I've been driving for over 10 years without any accidents. I've been driving for over 10 years without any accidents.
Eles dirigiram pela cidade para ver as luzes de Natal.
They drove through the city to see the Christmas lights. They drove through the city to see the Christmas lights.
Ela não dirige com frequência, mas ainda é uma boa motorista.
She doesn't drive often, but she's still a good driver. She doesn't drive often, but she's still a good driver.
Vou dirigir o carro do meu irmão para pegar comida.
I'm going to drive my brother's car to pick up some food. I'm going to drive my brother's car to pick up some food.
Ele vai me levar ao aeroporto para meu voo amanhã.
He's going to drive me to the airport for my flight tomorrow. He's going to drive me to the airport for my flight tomorrow.
Eu dirigi pela vizinhança, para encontrar uma vaga para estacionar.
I drove around the neighborhood to find a parking spot. I drove around the neighborhood to find a parking spot.
Ela dirige um conversível vermelho, o que sempre chama a atenção.
She drives a red convertible, which always attracts attention. She drives a red convertible, which always attracts attention.
Eles estão dirigindo pelo país em sua viagem de verão.
They are driving across the country on their summer road trip. They are driving across the country on their summer road trip.
Eu nunca dirigi na cidade antes. É um pouco cansativo.
I've never driven in the city before. It's a little overwhelming. I've never driven in the city before. It's a little overwhelming.
Ela dirige um longo trajeto todos os dias, o que pode ser cansativo.
She drives a long commute every day, which can be tiring. She drives a long commute every day, which can be tiring.
Vou dirigir meu carro até o mecânico para uma revisão.
I'm going to drive my car to the mechanic for a service checkup. I'm going to drive my car to the mechanic for a service checkup.
Ele nos levou até o casamento porque não tínhamos carona.
He drove us to the wedding because we didn't have a ride. He drove us to the wedding because we didn't have a ride.
Prefiro dirigir em vez de usar transporte público.
I prefer to drive instead of using public transportation. I prefer to drive instead of using public transportation.
Ela está aprendendo a dirigir na estrada pela primeira vez hoje.
She's learning to drive on the highway for the first time today. She's learning to drive on the highway for the first time today.
Ele está dirigindo até o escritório de um cliente para uma reunião importante.
He's driving to a client's office for an important meeting. He's driving to a client's office for an important meeting.
Dirigi do aeroporto até minha casa sem parar.
I drove all the way from the airport to my house without stopping. I drove all the way from the airport to my house without stopping.
Ela sempre dirige com cinto de segurança por segurança.
She always drives with a seatbelt on for safety. She always drives with a seatbelt on for safety.
Eles estão planejando dirigir até o show hoje à noite.
They are planning to drive to the concert tonight. They are planning to drive to the concert tonight.
Vou dirigir até o shopping depois do trabalho para fazer algumas compras.
I'm going to drive to the mall after work to do some shopping. I'm going to drive to the mall after work to do some shopping.
Ele dirige um carro da empresa, o que facilita o deslocamento.
He drives a company car, which makes commuting easier. He drives a company car, which makes commuting easier.
Ela me levou até minha casa depois que perdi o ônibus.
She drove me to my house after I missed the bus. She drove me to my house after I missed the bus.
Nunca dirigi tanto antes, estou um pouco nervoso.
I've never driven this far before. I'm a little nervous. I've never driven this far before. I'm a little nervous.
Ele dirigiu a noite toda para chegar ao seu destino pela manhã.
He drove all night to reach his destination by morning. He drove all night to reach his destination by morning.
Deveríamos dirigir até o zoológico neste fim de semana e passar o dia lá.
We should drive to the zoo this weekend and spend the day there. We should drive to the zoo this weekend and spend the day there.
Ela estava dirigindo rápido demais quando foi parada pela polícia.
She was driving too fast when she got pulled over by the police. She was driving too fast when she got pulled over by the police.
Ele vai nos levar ao restaurante para jantar.
He's going to drive us to the restaurant for dinner. He's going to drive us to the restaurant for dinner.
Eu dirijo meu carro todos os dias, mas ainda adoro isso.
I drive my car every day, but I still love it. I drive my car every day, but I still love it.
Ela está aprendendo a dirigir um caminhão para seu novo emprego.
She's learning how to drive a truck for her new job. She's learning how to drive a truck for her new job.
Passei pela padaria esta manhã e peguei um pouco de pão fresco.
I drove past the bakery this morning and picked up some fresh bread. I drove past the bakery this morning and picked up some fresh bread.
Ele dirige com sua música alta porque o mantém alerta.
He drives with his music blasting because it keeps him alert. He drives with his music blasting because it keeps him alert.
Nós iremos ao parque para assistir aos fogos de artifício hoje à noite.
We'll drive to the park to watch the fireworks tonight. We'll drive to the park to watch the fireworks tonight.
Ela me levou ao hospital quando eu não estava me sentindo bem.
She drove me to the hospital when I wasn't feeling well. She drove me to the hospital when I wasn't feeling well.
Eu gosto de dirigir de manhã cedo quando as estradas estão calmas.
I like to drive early in the morning when the roads are quiet. I like to drive early in the morning when the roads are quiet.
Eles dirigiram pelo estado para visitar seus parentes.
They drove across the state to visit their relatives. They drove across the state to visit their relatives.
Eu dirijo há tanto tempo que parece natural agora.
I've been driving for so long that it feels natural now. I've been driving for so long that it feels natural now.
Ela dirigiu na chuva para chegar à reunião na hora.
She drove through the rain to get to the meeting on time. She drove through the rain to get to the meeting on time.
Ele decidiu dirigir para o trabalho hoje porque é mais fácil do que pegar o trem.
He decided to drive to work today because it's easier than taking the train. He decided to drive to work today because it's easier than taking the train.
Eu vou levar meus amigos para o aeroporto amanhã de manhã.
I'm driving my friends to the airport tomorrow morning. I'm driving my friends to the airport tomorrow morning.
Ela dirigiu até o litoral para uma escapada de fim de semana.
She drove all the way to the coast for a weekend getaway. She drove all the way to the coast for a weekend getaway.
Eu te levo para casa depois que terminarmos aqui.
I'll drive you home after we finish here. I'll drive you home after we finish here.
Ela dirigiu pelas montanhas e viu algumas vistas incríveis.
She drove through the mountains and saw some amazing views. She drove through the mountains and saw some amazing views.
Preciso dirigir até o escritório para pegar alguns documentos.
I need to drive to the office to pick up some documents. I need to drive to the office to pick up some documents.
Ele dirigiu até a praia e passou o dia relaxando no sol.
He drove to the beach and spent the day relaxing in the sun. He drove to the beach and spent the day relaxing in the sun.
Vou dirigir o carro da minha prima enquanto o meu está na oficina.
I'm going to drive my cousin's car while mine is in the shop. I'm going to drive my cousin's car while mine is in the shop.
Ela não gosta de dirigir no trânsito pesado porque isso a estressa.
She doesn't like to drive in heavy traffic because it stresses her out. She doesn't like to drive in heavy traffic because it stresses her out.
Ele dirige todas as manhãs para o trabalho, que fica em outra cidade.
He drives every morning to his job, which is in another city. He drives every morning to his job, which is in another city.
Vamos dirigir até uma cidade próxima para visitar alguns amigos.
We are going to drive to a nearby town to visit some friends. We are going to drive to a nearby town to visit some friends.
Dirigi ao longo da costa e apreciei a bela paisagem.
I drove along the coast and enjoyed the beautiful scenery. I drove along the coast and enjoyed the beautiful scenery.
Ele sempre dirige com cautela, especialmente quando está nevoeiro lá fora.
He always drives cautiously, especially when it's foggy outside. He always drives cautiously, especially when it's foggy outside.
Vou dirigir até o aeroporto para pegar minha amiga que está chegando.
I'm going to drive to the airport to pick up my friend who's arriving. I'm going to drive to the airport to pick up my friend who's arriving.
Ela decidiu dirigir até o interior para tomar um pouco de ar fresco.
She decided to drive to the countryside for some fresh air. She decided to drive to the countryside for some fresh air.
Nunca dirigi no lado esquerdo da estrada antes, foi desafiador.
I've never driven on the left side of the road before. It was challenging. I've never driven on the left side of the road before. It was challenging.
Ele dirigiu durante a noite para evitar o trânsito pesado da manhã.
He drove through the night to avoid heavy morning traffic. He drove through the night to avoid heavy morning traffic.
Deveríamos dirigir pela cidade e explorar novos lugares.
We should drive around the city and explore new places. We should drive around the city and explore new places.
Ela dirige um carro antigo que é um verdadeiro clássico.
She drives a vintage car that's a real classic. She drives a vintage car that's a real classic.
Preciso dirigir até a loja antes que feche para comprar algumas coisas essenciais.
I need to drive to the store before it closes to get some essentials. I need to drive to the store before it closes to get some essentials.
Ele tentou dirigir no engarrafamento, mas foi impossível.
He tried to drive around the traffic jam, but it was impossible. He tried to drive around the traffic jam, but it was impossible.
Nós iremos até a sala de concertos e encontraremos um bom lugar para estacionar.
We'll drive to the concert hall and find a good parking spot. We'll drive to the concert hall and find a good parking spot.
Ela dirigiu até a biblioteca para devolver alguns livros.
She drove to the library to return some books. She drove to the library to return some books.
Não tenho certeza se quero dirigir na tempestade.
I'm not sure I want to drive through the storm. I'm not sure I want to drive through the storm.
Eles decidiram dirigir juntos para economizar gasolina.
They decided to drive together to save on gas. They decided to drive together to save on gas.
Estou dirigindo para uma reunião, mas estarei disponível por telefone se necessário.
I'm driving to a meeting, but I'll be available by phone if needed. I'm driving to a meeting, but I'll be available by phone if needed.
Ele vai levar as crianças para o jogo de futebol esta tarde.
He's going to drive the kids to their soccer game this afternoon. He's going to drive the kids to their soccer game this afternoon.
Nós dirigimos por horas e finalmente chegamos ao nosso destino.
We drove for hours and finally reached our destination. We drove for hours and finally reached our destination.
Passei pelo parque e vi muitas pessoas jogando basquete.
I drove past the park and saw a lot of people playing basketball. I drove past the park and saw a lot of people playing basketball.
Ela decidiu dirigir pela rota panorâmica para aproveitar a vista.
She decided to drive through the scenic route to enjoy the views. She decided to drive through the scenic route to enjoy the views.
Ele me levou até a estação de trem para que eu pudesse pegar meu trem.
He drove me to the train station so I could catch my train. He drove me to the train station so I could catch my train.
Vou dirigir meu carro até o mecânico para uma troca de óleo.
I'm going to drive my car to the mechanic for an oil change. I'm going to drive my car to the mechanic for an oil change.
Ela dirige com cuidado e sempre segue as regras de trânsito.
She drives carefully and always follows the traffic rules. She drives carefully and always follows the traffic rules.
Eles dirigiram a noite toda para chegar ao show a tempo.
They drove all night to get to the concert in time. They drove all night to get to the concert in time.
Ele estava dirigindo tão rápido que recebeu uma multa por excesso de velocidade.
He was driving so fast that he got a speeding ticket. He was driving so fast that he got a speeding ticket.
Eu dirijo se você quiser relaxar e aproveitar a vista durante a viagem.
I'll drive if you want to relax and enjoy the view during the trip. I'll drive if you want to relax and enjoy the view during the trip.
If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and stay tuned for the upcoming episodes to keep improving your English. And remember, listening, practice, and improve.